The storm came without mercy. The winds howled through the endless Texas plains, carrying with them a fury that turned the wide-open land into a sea of white. The old wooden train, stationed at Copper Ridge, stood, trembling under the weight of the blizzard. Its lantern flickered weakly, fighting to stay alive against the roaring snow. The platform was empty except for a single figure. Wrapped in a torn shawl, her fingers blue and trembling, stood Clara Evans, a young nurse from the city. She had come from New Orleans on a hospital train that derailed miles back. The other passengers had found shelter in the nearby town, but Clara, she had refused to leave without her medical bag, the one holding the only dose of a rare medicine for a child fighting pneumonia. In Copper Ridge, now she stood alone, her breath coming in thin white clouds, her body on the verge of collapse. The station clock ticked, the sound faint under the storm's scream. The train she'd been waiting for was already delayed 4 hours. The conductor said no one would come tonight, not in this kind of weather. But Clara stayed. She had promised that sick child's mother she'd bring the medicine before dawn. Her knees weakened. Her mind started to blur. The world faded into white, until she heard the sound of hooves. Through the storm, a dark figure emerged, tall on horseback, his wide-brimmed hat low, his coat flapping against the wind like a flag of defiance. The horse snorted steam, stamping the snow beneath it. The rider dismounted with a firm thud, his boots crunching into the frost. "Ma'am?" His voice was deep, roughened by years of desert wind and silence. "You shouldn't be out here." Clara looked up, her vision swimming. All she saw was a man with sharp blue eyes, the kind that had seen too many winters and lost too many people. "I'm waiting for the train," she whispered, her lips nearly frozen. "I can't leave." "Not yet." The cowboy looked at her with disbelief. "Ain't no train coming through tonight. Rails are buried." He pulled his coat tighter and stepped closer. "You'll freeze to death if you stay another minute." Clara tried to answer, but her voice gave way to a small, broken cough. The cowboy didn't waste another second. He scooped her into his arms, her frail body trembling against the warmth of his chest. "Easy now," he muttered. "You're safe." He carried her through the blinding snow to his horse, lifting her gently onto the saddle in front of him. "Hold on tight, miss," he said, wrapping his arms around her as he mounted. The horse snorted again and started forward through the storm, guided by instinct more than sight. For miles there was nothing but white. The wind clawed at their faces, the cold biting through even the thickest leather. But the cowboy never slowed. He rode until a faint glow appeared through the storm, the lights of Silver Creek Ranch. When they reached the barn, he dismounted quickly, carrying Clara inside where it was warm and dry. The horses whinnied softly, the air filled with the smell of hay and smoke. He laid her down on a bed of blankets near the fire pit, lighting a fresh flame with shaking hands. Only then did she whisper weakly, Who are you?" The man hesitated, then said quietly, "Name's Colt McCade." Her eyes fluttered open slightly. "You're the Millionaire Cowboy?" He gave a faint smirk. "I reckon some folks call me that. But money don't mean much when the land's frozen solid." She looked around the barn. Everything was clean, well kept. The mark of someone who built his world with pride. "You live here alone?" she asked softly. "Been that way since the war," he said, throwing another log onto the fire. "Got enough ghosts to keep me company." Clara shivered again, and he handed her a steaming cup of coffee. "Drink this. You need warmth more than questions." As the fire crackled, the sound of the storm outside began to fade. Inside that quiet barn, two strangers, one hardened by loss, one driven by duty, found themselves trapped by fate. Hours passed. Clara dozed in and out of consciousness. She awoke once to find Colt sitting beside her, whittling a small piece of wood with his knife, his eyes lost in the flames. "You saved my life," she murmured. He didn't look up. "You were at my train station, miss. Couldn't just ride past. You didn't have to risk yourself." He paused, the knife still. "Maybe I did." Their eyes met. For a brief moment, the firelight caught the pain hidden in both their souls. Colt had seen too much death. Lost his father to drought, his brother to war, and his fiancée to fever. He had sworn never to love again, never to let another person close enough to hurt him. But now, sitting beside the shivering nurse who'd risked her life for a sick child, something stirred in him he thought was long dead. As dawn crept over the horizon, the storm finally broke. The sky turned from black to silver. and the ranch glistened under a blanket of snow. Clara tried to stand, her legs weak. Colt helped her, steadying her shoulders. "You'll need rest," he said. "I can't," she replied. "There's a child waiting in Copper Ridge. He needs this medicine." He frowned. "That's 10 miles through the canyon road. You'll never make it alone." She looked up at him, her eyes steady. "Then help me." For a moment he hesitated. The man who'd turned away from the world for years suddenly faced a choice. Stay safe in solitude or ride into danger again for someone else. He sighed and pulled his hat low. "Saddle up, nurse. We ride at first light." The sun hadn't fully risen when Colt McCade and Clara Evans rode out. From Silver Creek Ranch, the storm had passed, but the world it left behind was frozen. The kind of cold that bit through gloves and turned breath into clouds. The snow crunched beneath Colt's stallion, a tall black horse named Ranger, whose steady gait made the ride bearable through the rugged canyon trail. Clara sat behind Colt, clutching the medicine, bag to her chest as the wind whipped strands of her golden hair across his coat. The silence between them was long, broken only by the steady rhythm of hooves and the faint jingle of Colt's spurs. "You always this quiet?" she finally asked, her voice muffled by the scarf he'd given her. Colt chuckled softly. "I talk when there's something worth saying. Most folks fill the air 'cause they're afraid of the quiet. And you're not?" "Ma'am, the quiet's been my only friend for years." Clara smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time you made another." He glanced back just long enough to catch her eyes, and clear, determined and shining with warmth despite the cold. "You sure got away with words, nurse." "I'm used to calming scared people," she replied. "You look like one." That made Colt laugh, a low, rough sound that echoed off the canyon walls. It was the first time he'd laughed in years, and he didn't even notice. The road ahead was treacherous. Ice had covered most of the rocky path, and the canyon winds howled like wolves. Colt's experience kept them steady, but his instincts told him something wasn't right. "Hold on tight," he muttered. "Canyon wind's stronger than it looks." Just as he said it, a sharp crack echoed above. A small avalanche broke loose from the ridge. Snow and ice thundered down in front of them, blocking the trail completely. "Damn it!" Colt cursed under his breath, pulling Ranger back. The horse neighed in protest. "We can't go forward." "We'll have to circle around through the ravine." Clara's eyes widened. "Isn't that dangerous?" He smirked. "Everything worth doing usually is." They turned off the main path and rode into a narrow ravine lined with frozen pine trees. The air grew even colder, and the sound of water trickling beneath the ice filled the silence. "Tell me something, Clara," Colt said after a while. "Why'd you risk your life for that kid?" Most folks would have waited till the storm passed. Clara's fingers tightened on the bag. "Because when I was little, I lost my brother to pneumonia. The doctor said if we'd gotten medicine sooner, he might have lived. I promised myself I'd never let someone else die waiting." Colt nodded slowly, understanding more in that moment than words could say. "You got more courage than most men I know." She looked at him and smiled softly. "And you got more kindness than you admit." He laughed again, shaking his head. "Kindness? Ma'am, I'm just doing what's right." "Maybe," she said quietly. "But sometimes what's right is also what's good." By midday, they stopped to rest near a half-frozen stream. Colt built a small fire while Clara melted snow in a tin cup for tea. As they sat beside each other, steam rising between them, the cold world around seemed to fade. "So, Millionaire Cowboy?" Clara said playfully. "How'd a man like you end up living out here all alone?" He poked the fire with a stick, his jaw tightening. "Used to have plans, big ones. I built this ranch after the war. Thought I'd fill it with life, family, kids. But the woman I loved caught the fever that swept through the county 3 winters back. Never made it." Clara's eyes softened. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Ain't your fault. After that, I figured love just wasn't for men like me. Better to keep to my horses and the land." She looked at him gently. "But you still built something beautiful. You didn't give up." He met her gaze, the firelight flickering between them. "Maybe I just didn't know how." The silence that followed was deep, not awkward, but alive, filled with something new neither of them could name. The rest of the ride was quiet. The snow began to thin as they neared Copper Ridge, and the scent of pine and smoke hinted at civilization ahead. Just when the rooftops came into view, a group of wild wolves crossed their path, drawn by hunger and the scent of horse. "Stay close," Colt said, his hand moving instinctively to his revolver. The wolves growled, circling them slowly. Clara's heartbeat quickened. She'd never seen wild predators this close. Colt's eyes stayed locked on the pack leader, a massive gray wolf with ice-blue eyes. When the beast lunged, Colt fired once, the shot echoing through the canyon. The wolf fell, the rest scattering into the trees. Ranger reared but stayed steady under Colt's grip. "You all right?" he asked, turning to Clara. She nodded shakily. I thought we were done for." He holstered the gun. "Not on my watch." She smiled faintly. "You're full of surprises, Mr. McCade." He grinned back. "Guess the world ain't done with me yet." By the time they reached Copper Ridge, dusk had settled. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the golden light of lanterns glowed through the frost. Clara rushed to the small wooden house at the edge of town, the child's home. Inside, a mother cried tears of relief when Clara handed over the medicine. The boy's breathing was weak but steady. Clara stayed to help, preparing the dose while Colt waited by the door, his hat in his hands. When the treatment was done, Clara stepped outside, her eyes glistening. "He'll live," she said softly. Colt smiled, a small, quiet smile, but it reached his eyes. "Reckon you just saved a life, miss." "You helped me do it," she said, looking up at him. He tipped his hat. "Just gave you a ride." "You gave me more than that," she replied. "You gave me hope." For a moment, neither spoke. The snow fell lightly around them, the town silent except for the distant whistle of a train, finally arriving an hours too late. Colt looked toward the sound. "There's your train." Clara hesitated. "And there's your ranch. Guess this is where our trails part," he said quietly. She nodded, but the look in her eyes said something else. Maybe not forever." He smiled faintly. "We'll see about that." As she turned to leave, Colt reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden carving, the one he'd whittled the night before. It was a tiny horse, rough but crafted with care.
"For you," he said.
"Something to remember the storm by." Clara held it close, her heart pounding. "I don't think I'll ever forget it, or you." And as the train whistle echoed across the frozen plains, both of them knew their story wasn't over yet. Spring came slowly to Texas that year. The ice melted from the rivers. The prairie grass turned green again, and the sky returned to its wide blue glory. But for Colt McCade, the world didn't feel the same. Every morning he rode across the hills of Silver Creek Ranch, fixing fences, feeding cattle, checking wells, and the same routine he'd lived for years. But now something was missing, or rather someone. He told himself it was just gratitude. That he only thought about the nurse because she reminded him what courage looked like. But when he saw the tiny wooden horse he'd carved still sitting on the edge of his workbench, and the cloudy memory of her smile flickered in his mind, Colt knew it wasn't gratitude. It was love. Still, he didn't ride after her. Didn't write. Didn't speak her name aloud. The man who'd lost everything once was too scared to lose again. Meanwhile, Clara Evans stayed in Copper Ridge, working as the town's only nurse. Word of her bravery spread across the plains. How? She'd crossed a frozen canyon to save a dying child, with the help of a cowboy who appeared out of the storm like a guardian angel. She smiled whenever people told the story, but deep down she felt the same ache Colt did. Nights were quiet. The wind outside her window sounded like hooves fading into the distance. Sometimes she thought she heard his voice, low and steady. "You'll freeze to death if you stay another minute." One morning she received a letter from the town mayor. A new hospital was being built in Silver Creek, funded by none other than Colt McCade, the millionaire cowboy himself. Her heart nearly stopped. Silver Creek. 2 weeks later, she arrived at the ranch. The same gates, the same wide pastures. The land looked different without the snow, but the memory of that storm hung in the air like a ghost. Colt was out by the corral training a new horse. When he saw her, the rope in his hand went slack. For a long moment, neither moved. The silence between them was heavier than the Texas heat. "You came back," he finally said, his voice rougher than before. "I heard you were building a hospital," she replied, stepping closer. "Didn't think a man who claimed he didn't care for people would do that." He gave a small smile. "Guess a nurse once told me I still had kindness left in me." She laughed softly, her eyes glistening. Maybe she was right. They walked to the porch, where Colt poured her a cup of coffee, just like that night in the barn. "You never wrote?" she said after a moment. He stared into the distance. Didn't think you'd want to hear from a man like me. And what kind of man is that? Broken, he said simply. I've buried too many dreams to go digging up new ones. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and said, Colt, broken things don't stay broken when someone cares enough to mend them. He turned, eyes softening. You always talk like that? Only when it matters. Over the next few weeks, they worked together on the new hospital. Clara handled the supplies, organized staff, treated the workers when accidents happened. Colt oversaw the construction, making sure every nail, every board was solid. Sometimes they argued, fiercely, passionately. He was stubborn. She was determined. But every fight ended the same way, with laughter or quiet understanding. The walls around Colt's heart began to crack, letting in sunlight he thought he'd never feel again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange and gold, Clara found Colt sitting on the porch, holding something in his hand and her old shawl, the one she'd been wearing that frozen night. You kept it? She asked softly. He nodded. Couldn't throw it away. Reminds me that life can surprise a man when he least expects it. She smiled, stepping closer. And does it still surprise you? Colt looked up, his blue eyes shining like dawn. Every time I see you. Days turned into months. The hospital opened with great celebration. Townsfolk from miles around came to see the building. Strong, bright and beautiful, standing like a promise in the heart of Silver Creek. Reporters wrote about it, calling it the miracle of the plains. They said it was built not just from timber and stone, but from love and courage. That night, as fireworks lit up the sky, Colt and Clara stood together at the edge of the crowd. You ever think about that storm? He asked. Every day, she whispered. It changed everything. He nodded. Funny how the worst storms bring the best things. She smiled, taking his hand. And sometimes, they bring the people we were meant to find. A hush settled between them. The world faded, the music, the noise, the laughter, until it was just the two of them under a sky of sparks and stars. Colt took a deep breath, his voice low. Clara Evans, you walked into my life when I was ready to give up. You thawed a heart that was colder than that winter night. And I figure, I don't want to spend another season without you. Tears welled in her eyes. Colt. He pulled a small velvet box from his coat. It ain't fancy, he said, but it's real. Inside was a ring made of silver and turquoise, carved by Colt himself. Will you stay here with me? She laughed through her tears. You really think I could leave? Colt smiled, the biggest smile he'd shown in years. Then it settled, and right there, beneath the Texas stars, the Millionaire Cowboy kissed the nurse he'd once found freezing. At a lonely train station, the woman who'd warmed his soul forever. Months later, newspapers across the state told their story. The cowboy and the nurse who changed Texas forever. Together, they turned Silver Creek into a town of healing, hope, and heart, proving that love born from a storm can shape history itself. And some nights, when the wind swept softly across the plains, folks swore they could still see them riding side by side, the cowboy and the nurse forever chasing sunsets together.